Okay, just a quick sound check as usual. If you're watching this, hello, something's going wrong with the camera. I'll sort that out and be right back with you. Sound and video weren't okay. Sound might have been okay, but video wasn't. For some bizarre reason, while I was sat here, the camera was zooming out automatically. Anyway, I think I've sorted it. I presume sound you can hear, so I'll go back to the countdown and see you in 13 minutes and about 6 seconds. Hello everyone, welcome to In Studio Live, the 87th edition, and yeah, it's great to be back with you and to be broadcasting live from the studio. And let's just get on with it, shall we? Let's waste no time and move on. So what have we got on the show tonight? Well, first of all, this isn't the show I wanted to bring you. Sorry. I was hoping to do a live shoot with a model tonight. As I think many of you know, I was going to look at studio portraiture lighting and give some tutorials on that. Unfortunately, the model and friend who was going to do it for me has had to pull out because she needs to be elsewhere this evening. I presume work related from the sounds of it. So unfortunately, my chosen model is not available, and the second model I booked so let me down by not replying to messages in time, leaving me no choice but to change the theme of the night. So anyway, hopefully I've still got a really interesting show for you. We will be looking at filters and how that can really affect your photography. Of course, we've got the standard feedback, and when we do look at filters, we're going to look at more than just sticking a bit of plastic in front of your camera. We're going to look at what's actually essential, what the key filters are, which ones you really need in your kit, and which are actually easier to do in post-production, because there are some. So that's all coming up. And of course, right at the end, I will announce this week's image of the week, which will be the banner for the Facebook group for the coming week. So that's what we've got coming up. As ever, it's an interactive show, so please put your comments in the live chat that goes alongside YouTube, and it'd be great to hear your comments as we go through. If you've got questions, then do ask them in there. I will try and answer them as we go through on the evening. Not always possible, but most of the time it is. Yeah, and chat to each other as well. You are allowed to do that. It's not just to me, but it's nice to have that going on, because then I know I'm not just talking to an empty room here in Stockport. So that's that. It's time, really. Let's get started with the feedback and look at the images which have been sent via email. Now, I say this every week, but I'll reiterate it every week in case we've got new people watching, which I think does happen occasionally. If you want to more or less guarantee having some feedback, then send your image to feedback@ians-studio.co.uk. That's the link on the screen behind me, because I can give better feedback from images which are emailed to me. I can check focus, I can check the shooting data and see what's going on there, and see whether your settings are appropriate for the subject, etc. Oh, just seen a new face in the chat. Hi, Paul. Great that you could join us. And yeah, so let's head over to Lightroom. Let me work through some of the images which have been sent in by email this week, and you'll see what what it's all about, and hopefully encourage more of you to email images in. Right, let's head over to Lightroom. Okay, so I've got a number of images which were sent in by Gary, which is 6 images. Because there's 6 of those and 3 others, what I'm going to do is I'll go through I'll go through your images fairly quickly, Gary, on there, give a bit of feedback on each of them, and then look at the others. So right, some flowers here. This is I would technically call it a flowerscape, with the that shallow depth of field in there. I like the fact that you've got some in the foreground out of focus, some in the background out of focus with it. The only thing that's bothering me a little bit with this, and I don't know that there was an easy solution to it, is, as ever with photographs, the eye's always drawn to the brightest part of the image. So I'm finding my eye constantly pulled upwards on this, and also pulled off to the side to this area here. So I would be tempted, at the very least, to crop that side down so we haven't got that little bit of building there, probably to something like that. Now, I'm just going to do an experiment on this. I wonder what would happen if we did lose the top bit. I'm just going to try and balance it up a little bit. And we've got something like that, which tonally I think I prefer, everything being within the greens on that, by cropping it in. Now, if you could have shot that from just slightly higher up, maybe, I know that would have caused an angling, a converging verticals on the flowers. But that's something that could have been corrected later and could have avoided that that white area up at the top, that bright area. So those are my thoughts on that, Gary. Moving on, this is a grave interior shot. It's a wide angle. Let's have a look at the shooting data on this, and if right, so yeah, 12mm. I could see it was an extreme wide angle looking down on it. There's been a little bit of vertical correction going on, I think, with it. I'm not sure it would take much more. Nice black and white conversion with it. That's worked well. I know why you've done the wide angle, because that would be a very constrained space that you were in. I like it. Not much more I can add to that one. Eyes kind of drawn over to this bright area here, the little bit on the edge there. I'm just going to do an experiment and see whether I can transform that. If I go guided, and definitely we would want that vertical, and we would want that vertical. Might be nice to have that as a horizontal, and we end up with something like that. Now, with something like that, yeah, this is why Gary hasn't corrected the verticals, because you can't unless you crop into something like that. Does that work any better than Gary's original? Not sure it does, but oh, excuse me. I thought it was worth giving it a try on there. Anyway, overall, Gary, nice shot, great black and white conversion, nice use of tones in there. With it, I think you probably got the best out of the subject there. Now, this I like. This is a theatre shot, of course. As I think everyone knows, I'm a big fan of theatre, and in fact, those of you who are local to Stockport will get your chance to see me on stage in December. Not a pantomime, but a thriller at Chad's in Cheadle. I will be playing Rough in the play Gaslighting. Anyway, that's beside the point. I'll be plugging that more and more as the months go on. Love this, like the composition of it. I like the zoom effect on there. Now, I'm going to take a guess on this, Gary, that you've done the zoom effect in post-production rather than in camera on there. Why am I saying that? Well, that's not lit by flash, so you wouldn't have been able to zoom the camera and keep the subject unblurred on it. So I think that's a combination of two images, a radial zoom applied on one, and then the non-zoomed version painted over to create the effect. And I think that is fantastic. Love the strong diagonal coming in of the trident on there. Really works well, and that zoom effect sort of really draws you in on the image. Very powerful on there. I'm just going to have a look at the EXIF data, see whether I'm right on it. ISO 3200, shutter speed 250th of a second. Yeah, you never did a radial zoom on that. With that on there, f2.8. How sharp is it? Nicely sharp, and you've sharpened it as well. Might have been slightly over aggressive with the noise reduction on there, because some of it is looking a little bit plasticky with the noise reduction, but generally lovely shot, and certainly at screen resolution, even like that, it's absolutely fine. It's just when I start to pixel peak on there, a little bit like the staff and the hands, just looking a touch plasticky, but great shot. Really like it. Another one in another church shot, similar to the previous. Nice to see all the verticals corrected on there. Great black and white conversion on it. ISO 1250. Right, if I zoom in, let's see how much noise we've got. A little bit of noise in there, more than acceptable on that. Don't know whether you've done any noise reduction. What is one thing that is a pity, unless this is something that's actually happened in the church, is that all the detail in the stained glass is blown out. Now, with something like that, I'd have been tempted to HDR it to try and capture that detail in the stained glass, simply because it's so a significant part of the final image on there with it. So take another shot underexposed to the point where you've got the detail there, and then combine the two HDR to solve that one with it. But generally, yeah, it works fine until you zoom in and see the blown out faces on the stained glass. I'm assuming because they are all blown out that it's not. It does happen in some churches. If an image has got damaged, and they can't recreate the face, they will just put blank glass where the faces used to be. I think it's unlikely that that's what's happened here. I think it's a blown out on there. But nice shot, nice black and white conversion with it. I'm assuming this is the outside of the church that shot and the previous one was in. Now this is one where I would go to the trouble of correcting the verticals on there. Let's have a look. We've got 24mm. The camera here is tilted up slightly on it, so I would correct the verticals or try and keep that camera with the back parallel to the subject to avoid that conversion. So let's have a look at how to do that. On there. So again, I'll do it with guided because that's usually gives me the best results, and something along there that would correct it. And now this with a crop will crop down quite nicely within parameters that we've got, and we've lost a little bit more of that tree there. So I think that framing, for me, I think works better. Now, the one other thing I might do with this is I might cheat the aspect ratio just just a touch with it on this, just to move that church out just a fraction. I don't know whether I've gone too far on there, but I think that to me feels more realistic than the one before I did the aspect ratio tweak on it. So I would do something like that with it, Gary. I think the framing on there works better with it being just a little bit smaller. Before and after, if it'll let me do it. Yeah, it's not going to let me do a proper before and after that way. So we will do it on the history. From that was what was imported to that. So original, corrected. And again, it's personal preference, Gary, but I think that is something that to consider with it. Another one of your Lonely Road shots. Right. Like the composition, like the 1/3, I don't think the black and white conversion is quite as good with this one. I'd like to try and see a bit more detail in this area of the sky, which we're losing. Difficult for me to try and do it at this stage in the process. I don't know whether, yeah, if I'm bringing up the contrast, that's not going to do it on here. Clarity. Yeah, you see, as I bring the clarity up, ignore everything else that's going on, but you can see that detail's working better in the sky now, and maybe even a little bit of texture. Now, that's absolutely ruined everything else, but if you could have done something like that and just applied that to the sky, which is entirely possible, fairly easy to do before the black and white conversion, actually, with it. I'm going to, you could do it by doing a, let's see, a filter, since we're talking about filters tonight. Now, here's the trick with this. You can actually use a filter to apply to the entire image, and notice where I've got my brush at the bottom, my pointer at the bottom. I draw the filter down here, hold the shift and place the overlay. You can see I've now just got that applying to the entire image. And once I've done that, I should be able to then, if I bring up that texture for the sky and the clarity for the sky, now what I want to do is I only want to apply it to the sky area. And the way I can do that is use a luminance mask on it, since I can't do a colour one. And with the luminance mask, I just want it to apply to the brighter areas. So if I do that, that's kind of brought back some of the stuff down there. With it now, the smoothness on there. Now, okay, let's see the difference before and after. You see, okay, there's a little bit. Oh, excuse me. Little bit applying to the scene, but the majority of it is restricted to the sky. It would be easier to do that before doing the black and white, because I could then really target either with luminance or colour range, just to create that effect on there. So that would be my suggestion on there. Is that the last one? I think it was. Yep. So, and then let's look at the other ones that have come in. Right, I want to start of the others, this one of Jane Lomas's image. Let me just go full screen on this. Now, I really like this. It's got a very painterly look to it. And if I look at the shooting data on here, what's quite remarkable about this is that this was actually shot on an iPhone 11. and yet it's quite a stunning image. Now, why do I draw your attention to that? I draw your attention to it because good photography isn't about what equipment you use, it's about what equipment you've got with you at the time, it's about what you're comfortable using, and it's about your eye. The biggest thing, I've said this many times, the biggest thing that you can learn to improve your photography is not settings and technical stuff, it's composition. You'll see the biggest change in your photography by learning to compose. And this is an image that is well composed. What I like about it is we've got foreground framing, we've got framing on the side, we've got effectively this diagonal, the bright area in the middle that draws us into the center of the image. We've got this effectively framing of the dry stone wall, and just the colours on it. It's not overexposed. Jane, I don't know whether you've done any editing in post-production on this. That could easily have gone through some form of HDR filter or some other editing filter with it. I think it might have, looking at the fringing on there, you see the purple fringes on the leaves. But overall, that is a lovely shot. Now, what you will find with something like this is if you look at the detail in the down here, can you see how blocky that sort of becomes when you zoom right in? Now, at screen resolution like that, that is absolutely fine. But the limitations of an iPhone would be if you wanted to blow this up to A3, you would start to see that softness and that lack of detail in the in things like that. Now, what causes that? Well, two things cause it. First of all, the size of the lens and the size of the sensor within a phone camera. And that's a physical limitation, and there's nothing you can do about that. It's something, I know, Jane, you want to carry on with phone photography rather than investing in something larger. You will have to accept that as a limitation. You're not going to be able to easily blow these images up to A3 or do a big mural with them, something like that, because you will start to see the limitations. If you just want to view them at screen resolution, absolutely fine. But overall, this is an absolutely cracking image, and it's one I really like on there. I love the fact that it looks like somebody's painted it, and I don't know whether that's with a filter or some other way. But thank you for sharing it. I know it's the first one you've shared, both with the Facebook group and with me to provide feedback on. And thank you for doing it. I look forward to seeing more of your images in the future if they're up to this standard. Right. Next. Oh, right. Next one. I'll do this one of Bernard's. I'll go straight into the develop module. Now, this is a raw image, well, raw JPEG, straight out of camera from a shoot that Bernard did at my studio with model Val. Unfortunately, it's got tilted. That's not a problem. Photo. Rotate counterclockwise. Now, the thing to comment on with this, Bernard, before I do some edits on it, is this will mean a little bit to Bernard and nothing to anybody else. It's one of those where, remember where the light's coming from. And one of the things, because this was a mentored shoot, I was in on the shoot, one of the things Val kept doing was kept turning away from the light. Your job, Bernard, when she does that, is to point her back at the light. And you can see, because she's turned away from the light, this side of her face is in shadow. If she didn't have to turn very far and we'd have got the light back on, and that's what it was set up for. That was the lighting that we'd set. It wasn't for looking straight at the camera. It was that modified full face where if I turn like that and put my eyes, you can just see one side of my face. This side sort of has got less light on it. This has got more light, and that's more how we were set up. The light was coming in, just lighting the narrow side of her face on there with the face turned. Now, the fact that she's turned to the camera and meant we're not getting any light into the eyes. Now, it's slightly underexposed. We can see that on the histogram. I know you were concerned in the shoot about the image, saying, "Oh, is that a bit overexposed?" But now we can see it on on the computer. You can see actually, if anything, it's underexposed. So when you've got a situation like that, always trust your histogram. So first thing I'm going to do is bring that up to try and deal with that underexposure. Now we've got a little bit of extra, the highlights there. I want to protect those from blowing out, so I can just bring that down a fraction in the edit. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and recrop and reframe this because she's over on one side. So if I just do that sort of straighten things up a little bit. Now, I need to deal with this shadow area, in particular with the eye. So I'm going to use an adjustment brush, and I'm going to bring the exposure up. I'm going to bring the flow right down to about 30 on here. Now what that means is it's only going to gradually build up this exposure on there. I'm going to bring the shadows quite high up because I want more in the shadow area than anywhere else on there. So I can now start painting on here. And can you see how that starts to lighten it up? I need a little bit more on the eyes, so I can just paint a bit more around there just to bring that in on there with that. So that's what I do. I'll possibly just give a little touch to that eye. Now it's not perfect, but it's helped the image along. So before and after, that would be before and that's after with it. So you can see how we've lifted the image with that edit. Now, I know with your photographic journey, Bernard, you're not at the stage of doing edits like that. I encouraged you to start shooting raw. Those sort of changes would have been even more effective on a raw file rather than a JPEG. So think about further down the line, I will be encouraging you to start editing your images. And for that, you're going to need a tool to do it. Now, I'm using Lightroom. You may not want to pay £10 a month for the privilege of using Adobe products. There are other products available which will allow you to do things like this. Affinity is one. That's a good replacement for Photoshop, and you can do raw processing in there as well. So we can talk about that perhaps at the next session that you come to the studio on. So right now, back to the other images. I want to talk about this one. Let's go full screen on there. And this is from Terry Mcnamara, and it's a sort of film noir type look. He loves his vintage shots, and this image is no exception. Looking at the shooting data for this, let's go have a look. He's 200th of a second at f2.8, so very shallow depth of field, focused on the eye, of course. It doesn't, and that really helps put the background out of focus. Even her hand is out of that depth of field on there. So lovely sharp image on there. Can't knock the sharpness on that. How was it lit? Well, I had already Terry asked me whether I wanted the shooting data. I said, well, I've got the shooting data on here in the EXIF, so we can see wide angle lens. And then he asked about lighting. Unfortunately, Terry can't join us tonight. So initially I said to him, well, don't tell me what it is. I'll try and work it out as part of the live stream, and then you can tell me in the chat whether I get it right. But he can't be with us, so he has actually told me. But my guess on this would have been that looking at the light, it's directional. So if he's set up lights, it's outside, probably somewhere over the bonnet and coming in onto the subject's face, and it will be pointing straight at her face to get the light on there. Then I'm looking at it, and it's not particularly harsh, but there's a transition there. So it looks more like a light that's been channeled rather than it being a small light source. So that means something with a grid on there, I would say. So we're looking at some form of softbox with a grid on that. Now, having had Terry work here in my studio, knowing the sort of lights that he prefers, and if I can see catch lights there, but they're not big enough to quite work out what it is. My guess would have been an octabox with a grid on it, on there. That's what I would have said, and sure enough, when Terry sent me the information through, that's exactly what he said. The only thing I didn't get on it was the fact that he got two Pica 200s inside his octabox on that. How on earth is that even possible? Well, if I go over to here, I can show you. He's using this beast, which allows him to attach two Pica 200s into a single bracket, which an S-fit bracket, which will then allow him to put the octabox on there. So that's what he's actually using on there. Nice bit of kit actually on there. Never used one, but I was looking at this kit, and with that you get. If you look what you get for 690 quid. You get two Pica 200s, two speedlight heads, two bare bulbs, two bare flash tubes, two rechargeable batteries, two battery chargers, two cables, umbrella brackets for both, and the dual. So you get the whole lot on there. Nice little bit of kit actually, that from Essential Photo or Pixar Pro. So that's what he was using to light that. So now, great shot, Terry, on there. Really like the effect of that. Great black and white conversion with it. I have seen the colour version online, but I think the black and white works wonderful on there. So, right, let's head back to what's been going on elsewhere. And let's have a look on here. Yeah, right. I was right about Gary Platt and the zoom effect. It was done in Photoshop afterwards. And Jane said, no editing, no filter, and it's straight from the camera. Cracking shot, Jane. Thank you for sharing it with us on there. As I said, look forward to seeing some of your others. One other thing for you, Jane, I know you're going to have to leave us shortly if you haven't done so already. I've got an extra thing which will be relevant to you right at the end. Right, okay, coming up then. Just a reminder, please subscribe, like and share. We've got 10 of you watching and only 6 of you are liking this. So the other 4, go and hit that like button or I'll fall out with you. Simple as that. No, seriously, if you can, it does help. If you're not already a member of the Facebook group, please join. Nice to see Peter join the Facebook group today. Thank you for joining us on there, Peter, on that. And if you haven't signed up for my newsletter, the link is down below, as is the link for the Facebook group for that matter. So, filters. This is our topic for the evening, and I've spent far too long going through your photos, folks. Let me see if I can get through these filters sensibly without going over. First thing to say about filters is they have gone out of favour a little bit with photographers. I don't see many photographers packing a whole load of filters in their kit bags these days, but they still have their place. Many of them can be replicated digitally, and I'm going to talk about that as we go through, but certain things can't, and certain filters, I would say, are essentials to have in your bag. Simply because there are certain techniques you can't replicate digitally, and you really need to do them in camera for the best results on that. But we will come on to that as we go through. So we're going to look first of all at the different filters, and we'll look at what you would traditionally use them for and how you would use them, and then we will look at how you can do the equivalents digitally in some cases. And finally, I'll talk about what I believe are the essential filters to have in your camera kit. Right, so filters. What are they? They're bits of glass or plastic which attach to the front of the lens and modify the light that's coming into the camera. Simple as that. And the first one I want to talk about is the controversial UV filter. So what is the UV filter? Well, it cuts out ultraviolet from entering the lens, but that typically is not what it's sold for. It's typically sold to protect your lens from scratches. To be perfectly honest with you, a UV filter will have little or no impact on the final image. It might have a very slight effect in hazy conditions, but to be honest, when I've tried to do comparison shots, I can't really see the difference. So the main use is to protect your lens from scratches. Do you want to do it? Well, if you do, there is an additional risk of soft images and lens flare. Basically, you've got two more surfaces of glass, front and back, to affect the light on its way through to the sensor. So you might have bought a lens costing over £1,000. Some of us do have lenses costing that. Do you really want to put a bit of plastic or a bit of glass costing 20 quid in front of it? If something over £1,000, think of the engineering that's gone into creating that glass, and you put in something that's 20 quid, that's going to affect your image. True story, I had a lens many, many years ago, and I sent it back to the manufacturer. I said, this is soft as hell, and it's not focusing right. There's something wrong with it. They sent it back to me with a simple note: remove the UV filter. And I was absolutely furious until I did a test. I did a shot with the UV filter on and one with it off. And sure enough, the softness was caused by the UV filter. And from that point on, I have never put a UV filter on my lens unless I am in hazardous conditions. What do I mean by hazardous conditions? Sandstorm in the desert, that sort of thing, on a beach, those sort of things. Very dusty environments. That's when I would consider putting a UV filter on. Other than that, no, I wouldn't use it, because I want the sharpest image possible, and I get that without putting extra bits of glass in front of my lens. I don't believe I am that prone to damaging my lens. If you want additional protection, just put your lens hood on, because that will help protect your lens from scratches. Okay, so how do other filters work? Well, we have holders. The Cokin system has a holder like this, and you can see That's the lens cap slotting in there. But you can slot in other things such as a polarizing filter, which is the first one I want to talk about. So what would you use a polarizing filter for? Well, traditionally it was used for two things. It was used to reduce reflections if you were shooting through glass or water, or to darken the sky on there. There are two types of polarizing filter, a linear polarizer and a circular polarizer. And they say for digital cameras, use a circular polarizing filter rather than a linear polarizing one. I have actually used a linear one, it was much cheaper. Why do they say circular, not linear? Because the circular ones can affect the autofocus system. But I guess if you're prepared to manually focus, that wouldn't be a problem. On there, so you pay your money, you takes your choice. The recommendation is always circular polarizing on there. And how do you do it? You put it in, and then basically you just turn the filter round until you get the desired effect. Just be a little bit careful that you don't over darken skies. There was a phase people went through with polarizing filters, and to be honest, skies that actually didn't need darkening, and they came out almost black, really deep blue on there, and it was an unnatural blue for it. So just don't make your skies too dark. Here's an example of it in use. It's not a brilliant shot, it's a church in Poynton, and I did use the polarizer on there just to darken down that sky a little bit on there. There is a comment in the chat which I'll just go over to, and Walter is saying you can also buy clear glass filters designed to protect the lens, and some manufacturers call it a protection filter. Yes, you can. Most places will just sell you a UV filter, to be honest. I've not looked at what the quality of protection filters, but the same issue applies. It's really you are putting light through two additional surfaces on there with it. And Walter's also just added, although there's the screen updating, saying that polarizer filter can also kill some of the light entering the lens. Yeah, that's true. It will darken things down. So they do have a minor effect like an ND filter, which I'm about to talk about. So always meter with the filter in place is the golden rule on that. On there. Right, so going back, a neutral density filter, an ND filter, looks something like that. It's a they come round or square if you're using something like the Kokin system, and they just basically cut out an amount of light from your image. So yeah, they just reduce the amount of light. It means you can get a slower shutter speed without closing down the aperture. Why would you want to do that? Well, maybe you've got your aperture as far closed as you can, or maybe you don't want to close it down because you want a shallow depth of field, or maybe you know, as is often the case, when your aperture is really close down, your lens isn't that sharp. So using an ND filter will allow you to get that slower shutter speed. Why would you want to do that? It will allow you to get that candy floss effect with things like waterfall, motion blur on bright days, classic thing. Now, ND filters come in 1, 2, 4 or higher stop versions. You can get 10 stop ones. You can actually get variable, which is basically two polarizing filters that you turn against each other to get darker there, which some people say they have mixed results with. Do be careful if you're buying ND filters. I have come across contradicting naming standards between different manufacturers, so just make sure you understand whether what the naming convention means. Does an ND1 mean it just cuts out one stop of light? It may do, it may not do. ND2 similarly on there, so just be aware of that and check that when you buy on there. You can stack them as well. Why would you use them? As I said, you get that shutter speed. Here's an example from Manchester to get that blur on the water. There to get a slower shutter speed on a bright day. And here's an example where it was stacked. This is Montmorency Falls near Quebec City in Quebec in Canada. And I stacked a couple of filters there to give me a 1 second exposure. And Gary Platt has added a comment about this. Let's have a look. ND filter system. He's adopted using magnetic frames, much easier to work with as they just snap in front of the frame, which is also attached to the lens. Yeah, a different system, different manufacturer. Cokin, it slides in. I've got to say, yeah, probably the magnetic ones are probably a little bit easier to work with, but mine's Cokin, so that's what I've got. So that's what I photographed for the talk on there. Right, next one, ND Grad Filter. As you can see, this is top half of it is a neutral density, bottom half is clear, middle bit is a transition between the two. So what do you use it for? Well, you use it for darkening the sky, known as an ND Grad Filter, and you will put the transition typically across the horizon or across, if you've got a nice line between sky and foreground on there. And it's used to balance the composition so that the bright sky doesn't overexpose. How many times have you created a shot where the sky is blown out? These are the filters to prevent that, to put them on there. Try and get that graduation over the horizon or where there's a nice line to put it. They can be difficult to use if there isn't a clear delimiting line there. So let me show you an image done with it. My favourite one, this is Morecambe Bay, and that sky is, as it looks in camera there, simply because I used an ND filter to prevent it blowing out. I wish I'd taken the shot without the ND filter to show you, but I don't have that. It was years ago when I took it. But it preserved all that detail in the sky by using the filter, and I placed the graduation over the horizon. You can't see it on the final image, it just works on there. And then you've got your coloured grads. They look like the ND grads, but they add colour to the sky part as well. Some people do believe the look is very dated. I did a whole series of images using a tobacco one, and one of the libraries I submitted it to rejected them, saying, oh, that looks terribly 1980s, which I suppose it did on there. The one that works least effectively, I would say, is the blue. It's least effective on skies with that. So here's an example of them in use at the forum in Rome. That's the image without any filter on there, and you can see the sky is more or less blown out. If I put an ND Grad on there, then a little bit is blown out, I can show you just round this area, but the majority of it I've managed to preserve the detail in the shot with that. The blue version, well, that's done better, but it just looks a little bit unnatural on there, simply because it makes it look like a sunny day in the sky, but not in the foreground on it. On there. Using a tobacco filter, as I said, gives an interesting effect on this. You could argue that it's a bit dated. This was the effect that got rejected by the library. However, I submitted it to Practical Photography and they used it as a double-page spread. So one up for me. I also submitted some similar images to a different photographic library where they sold. So maybe there are people who like 1980s style shots. Right, we've got a couple of comments in the chat before I go on, and Gary says that Gary Goff did a comparison between £10 and £100 ND filters, and the difference was marginal, and pixel peaking was necessary to distinguish between them. Yeah, I would say the main thing is make sure you don't scratch them and don't get dust on them. Right, Walter saying, how would you use a grad filter, for example, where there is a mountain cutting through the skyline or a church spire eating into the sky? Right, okay, let me go back to the image I was showing. This is exactly the problem I got here, because we've got those 3 columns sticking up. And what I've done, if I go back through the whole set, if I go back to this one, you can see I've brought it down a little bit more into the building and darkened that. And I suppose in post-production I should have brought that up. I didn't do on this. When I took that, my editing skills weren't as good as they are now. But with the coloured one, having that a long way down actually works, because it's actually coloured the buildings as well. And what I've gone for is a horizon. I've used that as my transition line, much lower down on there with that. So just take a little breather at this point, because I need a drink. And just to say, as ever, my show is sponsored by you, and thank you to those who have bought me a cuppa in the past, and for those who are going to buy me a cuppa in the future, please. And my special thanks today to Peter Ashford for today's cuppa. Thank you very much, Peter, for that. And if you want to buy me a cuppa too, just try and keep these shows on air, because they do cost in terms of time, effort to do. The links behind me and down below in the show notes. If you want to say thank you for keeping me on to keep me on air, that's a nice, easy way of doing it. So thank you to everyone who has done, and I will continue to put your names on the cuppa as we go on. Right, I'm running out of time rapidly. So how do we do filters in post-production? What can be done in post-production? Right, the first one I want to talk about is polarizing filter. You can darken skies in post-production, and that's really easy to do. Let me head over to Lightroom and I will show you how to do that. So here we go, into the develop module. The easiest way, if we go into color here, right, let me go full screen so you can see it. If we go to color down here, the color tab, we select, you can select each individual color. I'm going to select the blue, and it's really just a case of bring the luminance down slightly and the saturation up slightly. So let's just do a before and after on that. Did I? No, I didn't quite achieve that. Right. Easiest way to do it on the history. Here we go. That's what it looked like to start with. That's what it looked like doing that effect afterwards. So easy enough to do in post-production. And in fact, I find that easier than using a polarizing filter in the field for just darkening skies. So I wouldn't carry a polarizing filter for darkening skies. I would always just do it in post-production like that. That simple tweak on there. So then, next, the ND Grad Filter. How could you do this in post-production? Well, you have to, the main way is you have to expose to protect the highlights. And that will mean the rest of the image will be underexposed, and then you use the shadows and exposure sliders to bring back that detail in the shadows. You may have to also bring down the highlight slider to protect the highlights. Let me head back over into Photoshop and a different image, and I'll show you how to do that. So here's an example where you can see from the histogram, I've done as much as I can with this without blowing out the sky. The first thing I'm going to do, actually, I'll just correct everything that way. Now, what would I do in here? Well, first of all, the shadows I would bring up. I'd probably bring the exposure up, but look what's happened there. That's really, I've lost the detail that I'd nicely saved in the sky. This is why I would just then use the highlight slider to bring back that detail in there, and maybe just play around a little bit to do that. So you could do that. I could also generally, well, that particular one I think needs a bit warming up as well, just slightly on there. I think even a little bit more on the shadows. So I could do it that sort of way. Now, if I wanted to get even more detail in that background, I would do it as I did before, a graduated filter, but off the scale. Whoops. Just reset everything on there, and I could then bring down those highlights further. I bring down the exposure further, but I would then use a range mask on luminance and make sure that's only applying to the highlighted areas. So that way I've managed to preserve my sky detail with it. So basically you could do it that kind of way in post-production. It's a bit fiddly, but you'd never be able to do that with this shot. You wouldn't be able to do that with an ND filter. With an ND Grad Filter, because we've got this column in the middle of it. So that would make it hard to do that. So how else could you do it? Well, instead of an ND Grad, you could do multiple exposures and do expose for the shadows, for the midtones and the highlights separately, and combine them as an HDR. Back over to Lightroom, I'll show you how we do that. And I haven't actually tried this one. I just hope this works. So I've got here 3 images. One exposed for the midtones, one for the highlights, and one for the shadow areas on there. And if I right click and do merge, photo merge, that's the one I want, HDR on there. I really hope this works. I normally try these out before the live stream. Yeah, there we go, that's done it. So it's all aligned and that has worked. So I just say merge that together, it goes off and we see the progress bar up here. And full screen that, and there. And you can see that's how a way of doing it digitally. And it's not a bad approach to do. That just took 3 shots to do it. And it doesn't look too unnatural. Okay, so that's an automated thing. I haven't even tried playing around with that in the settings. So if I went in here, then I'd probably bring the exposure up just a little bit, might just warm it very slightly and probably add a little bit more clarity to it, and that would give me something along those lines with it, maybe a bit more vibrance as well. And there we go. A quick way of working around that. So that is one way of getting around the ND if you haven't got an ND Grad and you want to do it in post-production. And then Coloured grads, right, okay. These are a little bit harder to do, and I guess the easiest way is use an ND grad on the camera and then apply a graduated filter. So let's head back over here and find an image to do that with, and the one I have chosen is this. So I went to the develop module, and I'm just going to bring the exposure up a little bit on there. Let's try and create that tobacco effect, and again use the graduated filter. I'm just going to reset everything first, and I would put it along that sort of line, which is what I did in reality. Now I want to add a colour to it, so I reset that, wrong one, this colour down here, and I'm going to choose an orange on there. If I bring the exposure down, you see it brings the effect in more. If I just warm that up, I can then just play around. Ooh, I didn't mean to do that. Bring that down just a little bit, and some of those shadows need lightening up a little bit. And what else do I need to do? Probably just a little bit of saturation. There's the saturation on that. That brings it up a little bit. And then if I want to change the hue of it, I can use this slider to affect it. So yeah, you can do it. I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit, try and protect my sky in there. So that's how I would do the coloured grads in post-production, just using a single ND grad, and I can bring that down, find a nice line. So we've got there. So that's the answer to that one. So right, moving along. So what are the must-have filters? Right, what would I always carry with me? I would carry a polarizing filter, but for dealing with reflections rather than sky, which means I use it very, very rarely, to be honest. An ND filter or filters for getting slow shutter speeds with flowing water, as you've seen. I think those are essentials because there's nothing I can do in post-production really to do that one. So that one really has to be done in camera. And I would carry the ND grad because, to be honest, I think you get better results of using that when your sky is totally blown out. Having said all that, I'm usually a little bit too lazy to get it out of the pack and apply it, and I often end up doing it digitally, as you've just seen on there. So I can see there's nothing new interactive on there. So feedback back over finally, and I'm just running out of time here. Back over to Lightroom. I've got a couple of images I just need to talk about from the Facebook group on there. So, and here we go. All right, well, that one from Jane I've already talked about, so let's just remove that from the thing. So which leaves me just two from Sonia to talk about. Let me go full screen. This one, I think this is more of a snapshot rather than anything else. I think Sonia's probably going to be the first one to admit that. The best advice I would give you with this, as with any animal shot, is get down to the animal's eye viewpoint. So I think it's well exposed, but just shoot it from lower down on there. Simple bit of feedback on there. The other one, Sonia, you probably know what I'm going to say about this. It's a lovely shot. I like the foreground. I like the water wheel. It's this loss of at the top of the building. That's really the problem. It's well exposed on there. And I think this is blocking too much of the building. I'd be tempted to come round to the side so that this appeared to be only coming in to a section of it on there. So that's the feedback on the Facebook images this week. Not many of them at all, which means being able to talk about the member photo of the week, this comes down to, it was a really easy choice, but it was a cracking photo. So it was an easy choice in every sense. And my member photo of the week this week is this one from Jane Lomas. I really like it, Jane. This is why I said do tune in and stay to the end, because I just wanted to say this, I think, makes a really good member photo of the week, especially because it's an iPhone photo. And I'm a firm believer the best camera is the one you've got with you, and you can create great images with an iPhone, as we have seen here. Just be aware of what the limitations are. What will this look like on as the banner? Well, I've had to do it slightly differently because of the size of the image. It looks a little bit odd on that version, but that's because when you view the banner on a computer system, it chops off a little bit at top and bottom, and by doing it like that, it should work when it's on the computer, when you view it on the computer as a banner. So that's it. I will be changing the image shortly, and if you want one of your images to be member photo of the week, do make sure you upload images to the Facebook group. Just so that people are aware, because it's the Facebook banner, I only select from images which have been uploaded to Facebook, the Facebook group, not the ones emailed to me. So if you want to be in with a chance of being member photo of the week, do email me your images as you have been doing, folks, which is what I want. I want that. But you can also upload them to the Facebook group as well, and then they're in with a shot at that. So maybe it'll be your image next week. So thank you for watching. There's nothing new in the live chat on there. Next Sunday, I'm going to do something a little bit different next Sunday, and I want to tell you about it now so you can get your thinking caps on and see whether you can beat me. I'm issuing a challenge. Our theme next week, I don't know quite what I'm going to call it. It's possibly called Decoding Lighting. And we're going to look at how to look at an image and work out how it was lit. And how, this was inspired by the image from Terry Mcnamara, that shot of the car, where I'd looked at it and I worked out the type of lighting, where it was coming from, etc., etc. So, here's the thing. If you've got an image that has been specifically lit, then and you are going to be on the live stream, you're going to watch the live stream and be in the live chat next week and want to challenge me, send me the image, but don't tell me how it was lit. I will try and work it out live on the show, and then you can tell me in the live chat whether I was right or wrong. But the bulk of the teaching section next Sunday, I'm going to teach you how to read an image and how to decode how it was lit. The things to look for in an image to try and work out what the lighting was for that image. And I'm predominantly thinking about images where you've specifically lit it in a particular way, whether that's using speed lights, studio lights, reflectors, or you've thought about lighting, not just a shot and think, well, how was that lit? You've got to be able to tell me how you actually did it, but I'll be looking at images and teaching that. So any images with interesting lighting, get them up to the Facebook group or email them to feedback@ians-studio.co.uk. And the ones for the challenge, if you're challenging me, please email them to that email address. Don't tell me what the lighting is, and I'll work it out. I do want, one of the things I will need with that is the EXIF information. It really helps for one or two things. I won't use it for everything, but there's one or two circumstances where the EXIF information will actually help decode the lighting on there. So images to the Facebook group as well. And that's it for this week. So once again, thanks for watching, folks. And until next time, as ever, keep making great photos and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.